So, as Vint mentioned, the challenge he posed here, I'm not going to talk about DSL today. He and I got together, he said, with the rapid transition the last many years, last 2 years really, you see broadcast industry, particularly entertainment and television, but other forms of it as well, have moved to over-the-top video. We see the Netflixes or YouTubes or other forms of entertainment just in tremendous rapid change. And so what we had broadcast earlier, maybe it was more analog TV and other things, and now we've gone over the top. So how do we get back there to do this again over the internet? And there are the protocol issues that Vint mentioned, but then there's also just the transmission portion of it. So what are some of the challenges, and I don't mean to say all solutions here, but really raise some questions today with a few more slides. Now, the obviously synchronization is going to be important, and this is our tie-in to Brad and this year's winner. GPS, this will be necessary at many different points that are going to be broadcasting the same signals. There are forms of this that have been used for broadcast in Europe called single frequency network. There's something called LTE-B or broadcast that I'm going to say a few words about. I'm going to talk a little bit about multiple antennas and what happens in this context, satellite and unlicensed, and then wireline as well, a few words on that to kind of provoke the thoughts on broadcast signals. Now, single frequency network, basically this with the different colors here is intended to imply that we use different frequencies typically in adjacent cells in wireless today. Single frequency network transmits the same thing. It may not do it all the time, it may do it at some portion of the time, but it's the same frequency from all of the different antennas. Now, this is actually used today in digital video broadcast in Europe. It's also used in something called LTE broadcast, which I'll say a little bit more about. The frequency bands for this are 1.5 gigahertz in Europe and in the 500 megahertz range in the United States. Now, what happens, of course, when you do this single frequency network is you get the potential for multiple antennas transmitting the same signal. They've been synchronized by GPS, but their arrival, unless you happen to be right in the middle here, they don't necessarily all arrive at the same time, okay, or sorry, at the same distance from the transmitters. And so what happens is, with multiple signals combining, they can combine constructively, which are the peaks that in this graph here on the right I intended to show, or they can combine destructively, which means no signal. They're 180 degrees out of phase as they arrive. And so that creates a problem that you've actually fabricated by transmitting multiple times on the same frequencies. So the solution for this is coded OFDM, and I think I'll maybe take a minute just to respond to something Erwin said earlier. Coded OFDM is a form of CDMA that was used, and just on behalf of the Stanford faculty here, we have 4 of us now with Brad who are winners. A few years ago, it wasn't me. So and it wasn't any of the other winners either. I went to your house a few years ago just to tell you that. So don't put us all together. But of course, Stanford's a big place. We have a lot of different opinions, different people there, so like any other university. But the solution here is to recognize that when you're transmitting, you transmit a little broader bandwidth, presumably broader than the notching that's occurring. And where the green is a good passband region. Where the red is, the signal's blocked. So the solution for this is to apply a code. And you have to make sure there's enough redundancy in the code that you can recover from what would be a reasonably worst case condition where you're losing some of the frequencies. So this is sometimes called coded OFDM, and it is actually used in these single frequency network situations. So LTE-B in particular uses this also. So now one question that starts to arise in this area is multiple input, multiple output, multiple antennas. You have a single antenna, and basically you rate it equally in all directions. When you have multiple antennas, you can steer that. Lost the, there we go, it came back. if you have multiple if you have multiple antennas on both sides, you can actually steer the energy, kind of combine it, and help. So this allows reuse of space as well as frequency adaptively. However, when you think about that in broadcasting, and I did initially, I said, well, we kind of lose some of that advantage if we're sending the same signal everywhere, right? So the spatial multiplexing that is used with multiple input, multiple output might be lost. So I actually went to former students, or also coincidentally at Qualcomm, and asked them, Matt Grob and Durga Malati here, and they've actually done a study on this, and it turns out that if you have 2 or more users per cell and you use the LTE-B technology, their study here was with 2 transmit antennas in each of 57 adjacent cells, that you actually don't lose the advantage of MIMO, but you have to go to some very sophisticated transmission techniques that are a little different than the MIMO techniques that are used today. So it's basically a well-known theory that hasn't been completely applied yet, but in checking through that, it does look correct. So bottom line, even with MIMO and broadcast, it does look like those gains can be largely preserved. So now going over to fixed line situations, obviously feeding smaller wired cells. There is a protocol in cable or passive optical networks called dynamic bandwidth access. It does allow some of the user slots to be shared for broadcast messages, and if we were synchronizing the antennas that go out to the smartphones and tablets and so forth, there's a feasibility to do that. More generally, a broader question would be across all the different media. If we wanted to do broadcast, which ones would we select? Which ones would we use? Cellular, satellite, so forth, to synchronize the various signals and do broadcast over the top. Does that make sense at all? So then finally, unlicensed bandwidth. Someone mentioned position location for Wi-Fi earlier inside the home. 80% of mobile data today is offloaded on Wi-Fi. Most of that's occurring inside the residence or in hotspots. Would or could we try to design a broadcast system that should work with that? What kind of synchronization challenges would there be? Should we be using LTE in the unlicensed band to match it to the LTE-B or doing something else? And would that really help? Would it be worthwhile to do? So with those as kind of basic thoughts on this, we invite during the panel session, Vint and myself, people who may know about this to comment and tell us what you think about broadcast basically over the top of the internet.